OTAs is going on right now, but we're going to talk about a little bit of roster math, looking at the guys that could be making a statement or trying to make a statement for the roster today on Locked On Chiefs.
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
Hey, Chiefs Kingdom, welcome back for another episode of Locked On Chiefs, your daily podcast covering the Kansas City Chiefs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Thank you for making Locked On Chiefs your first listen of the day. Don't forget, we're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube as well. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Apple Podcasts. Wherever you get your podcasts, you can find us there. And do not miss a chance to go check out Locked On NFL. Lots of good information over there as well. I am Chris Clark from Chiefs Corner. This is Matt Derrick from Chiefs Digest. You should recognize him. He is always usually here with Ryan. But today I get to talk to him. And we're going to get into a little bit of something. Obviously, OTAs is going on right now. We don't really have much information because it's not open to the media. So we're going to talk about some long shots to make the roster a little bit later in the show. And then we're going to talk about defensive log jams in the next segment. But we're going to start this show off talking about some of the offensive math for the 53. And really what this comes down to for me is when you look at it, it's one of those situations where there's a lot of different positions that are going to be questionable as to how many they're going to keep, because it's going to affect everything.
Yeah, Chris, we could debate about how many they're going to take at virtually every position. And I could even bring quarterback into that, because you're probably going to have to make a decision about whether you want Bailey Zappe on the 53, you'd have to protect him, or whether you can squeeze him onto the practice squad, or Chris Oladokin. So, yeah, I mean, offensively, I think there's a lot of decisions to make.
I'm interested to see, and we'll have the conversation about quarterback a little bit later, but to me, that's not really where the biggest logjam is. To me, the biggest logjam, we were talking about this before the show started, offensive line. I mean, offensive tackle, you have a lot of different bodies there, and obviously, you have a guy in Ethan Driscoll last year who made the roster. They kept him on the roster because they saw they saw things that they really liked at the preseason. But then you go out and you sign a guy in Jalen Moore this offseason for $15 million a year. You draft Josh Simmons. Obviously, you're moving Kingsley Suamataia inside. He's going to play guard, but you still have a lot of other players at that position right now.
Yeah, you really do. I mean, I think obviously you've got 6 guys that you're 100% are probably going to make this team, and you're talking about your starting 5, and whether you put Jalen Moore there or Josh Simmons, there's 2 of your first 6. Yep. Kingsley Suamataia, I think you'd pencil in there automatically right now, probably one way or the other, whether he wins the left guard job or not, but we're putting him in there. Obviously, Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith, Jawan Taylor. Then I think, Mike Caliendo, because of his flexibility and competing for that left guard spot, he's in there for 7. Wanye Morris, I think you're absolutely right now would be there. It's just an extra swing tackle. You can obviously play the right side as well. So now you're up to 8. I think Hunter Norzad, once again, for his flexibility, development, I think he's 9. So right. 10, I mean, based on last year, you'd say Ethan Driscoll is your first man up, but I tell you what, 2 undrafted rookies, because the Chiefs love their undrafted rookies. Esapole, who, rarely playing tackle. Dalton Cooper, who's more of an interior guy right now, as far as how they're using those 2 guys. I mean, are they on the outside looking in? Is Esapole going to be able to beat out Ethan Driscoll? I mean, I think the Chiefs are probably keeping 5 tackles and 5 interior linemen, unless the math really changes. But you keep 10 offensive linemen, you're not keeping somebody at another spot.
Right. Well, and that's the big question, because you start looking at this, and I want to argue really quick, because I have a hard time believing, and maybe Bailey Zappe will do something to prove it to me. And I know Ryan would love this because he's a big Bailey Zappe fan, and I have no problem with Bailey Zappe, the player. It's just Kansas City hasn't kept 3 quarterbacks for a very long time. They've always kept 2. They've had one on the practice squad. It's usually been Chris Oladokin lately. So that, to me, seems like a no-brainer. But if you keep 3 and you keep 10 offensive linemen, that puts you at 13 already before you even start talking about running back, tight end, or wide receiver.
Yeah, and if you're talking about keeping 6 wide receivers, and you probably would keep at minimum 3 tight ends, even if you kept 5 wide receivers. There's 8. Are you keeping 2 running backs? No. So, yeah, it is definitely challenging there. And that's why, once again, I mean, there's trade-offs. So if you're going to keep 10 offensive linemen, it certainly would probably eliminate keeping a second quarterback, but it also probably eliminates either keeping a 4th running back, which the Chiefs right now, I mean, they've got at least 4 quality running backs that I think they would absolutely be thinking about keeping.
Well, yeah, and that brings me to, and I know we'll talk about this a little bit later when we get to long shots, but Brashard Smith is a guy who's a 7th round pick. And when you start talking offensive roster math, it's a question of, okay, maybe he doesn't really fit what you're thinking you're going to have at the running back position, but maybe he's a special teamer that could be a contributor as your returner. And then he becomes one of the guys that makes the roster because he's giving you the return ability plus being able to play running back.
Yeah, and that's where, once again, then it really gets into the math, because you look at that running back spot, and I would say Brashard Smith is really the one guy that you're talking about being a special teams player in that sense, because, hey, Isaiah Pacheco, Kareem Hunt are not returning kicks. I doubt Elijah Mitchell is returning kicks.
Right.
So Brashard Smith is your one guy. You need 2 kick returners. And Brashard Smith, I mean, of all the rookies coming in, he is the best option. You've got Nico Remigio. He's obviously an option too. That's a separate question at wide receiver, who's going to be making it. But right now, and then it's not only you talk about who's on the 53, but who's going to be active each week. I mean, your starting running back and Brashard Smith are going to be active each week. So, I mean, right now, do you see a scenario where Pacheco and Hunt are not active week to week? I mean, likelihood is that you've got that there. Those 3 are going to be active. So, as a veteran like Elijah Mitchell, is he just going to be inactive week to week, or is it going to be dependent upon who's healthy that week and who's injured? And when you start thinking about it in those terms about who's going to be active and who's going to be inactive each week, that makes it even more difficult.
Well, and that doesn't even mention a guy, and I know you talked about Brashard Smith being your special teams guy from the running back position. Carson Steele's a running back. I mean, I know that they list him as a fullback, but you can say what you are a running back, and he played fullback a lot, but he's still going to be a guy that I think is also, I mean, he made the roster last year. He contributed on special teams. He was a core special team guy last year. That's huge for Dave Tobe. And when you're starting to look at the roster math, how does this all play out? And I have to say, I don't think that you mentioned 3 tight ends as a possibility. I don't think that's a possibility. I can't see them keeping only 3 tight ends with Travis Kelce being 36. I just can't see them only keeping 3 of them. They've usually kept 4.
And I think the only reason that they're going to start the season with 3 tight ends likely is just because Jared Wiley's not going to be one of the 53 to start the season. He's going to be, okay, I think, absolutely on the PUP list to start the season. Maybe maybe
that really helps.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it'll be a roster decision, kind of a technical decision on what list that they end up putting him on. But all indications to me are that Jared White is not going to be ready for the beginning of the season, and probably wouldn't be ready for the first 6 weeks, which makes the PUP list just all the more likely. And then, yeah, I mean, then you can keep Kelce, Noah Gray, and then, hey, do you keep Robert Tonyan because you think that you can keep, maybe sneak Elijah, or you sneak Jake Briningstool onto the practice squad, or the other way around? I mean, one of those 2 guys will be the 3. Hard to see Robert Tonyan ending up in the practice squad, but it's always possible.
And then you get into the fun position of talking about the wide receivers, which we haven't talked about. And one of the things that is going to play into this is obviously, and I would imagine, I haven't seen anything, and I don't know, maybe you have. Rasheed Rice is probably still, I would think, going to be suspended at some point. So maybe that takes care of itself and takes one of the wide receivers off the roster for a period of time. But between Brown and Worthy and Royals and Juju, I mean, that's at least 4, not including Rice, who would be 5, assuming he's not suspended. Then you get to a point where it's like, okay, if Brashard Smith isn't your returner, is Nico Remigio your returner, or is there somebody else there that makes a move trying to make it as a wide receiver on this roster?
Yeah, and that's where, I mean, once again, it gets even trickier, because if you're thinking that you've got 4 guys for sure, and let's set aside, Rasheed Rice's off the field issues and include him as one of those 4, because I increasingly think that there's not going to be any suspension to start the season. So we'll see how the legal case plays out. But I increasingly see, unless there is a plea bargain, I don't know that he's going to start the season suspended. I think that's going to continue to drag on. So let's say you got 4 players right there that you've got is pretty guaranteed to make the roster barring any injuries. You're going to keep 5 or 6. Is Juju Smith-Schuster just a guaranteed on the roster 5th guy for you? I mean,
I don't think so.
I'm not sure that he is, just because of the age and the miles on those knees. That's why it makes it a little bit questionable. But if Juju is your 5th, then you almost certainly need a 6th as a special teamer, because as much as Dave Tobe talked about, hey, last year Xavier Worthy was going to be a returner until injuries hit, and he got a little bit of revisionist history. He said it was after the Rashee Rice injury. It was really after the Hollywood Brown injury that they took the Xavier Worthy as your punt returner off the equation. But he's still going to be a starter this year. So you're not going to have Xavier Worthy. As much as Dave Tobe wants to think about it and dream about it, he's not going to be in the return question. Could Jalen Royals fit into the return question as your 4th receiver? Maybe. But I don't get any indication at this point that the Chiefs are entertaining that option. So it could happen right now. I mean, everything would be set up for that 6th receiver spot to be a special teams player who's going to return kicks. And right now that's Nico Remigio. And obviously at this point, we're leaving off a Sky Moore, who's been around forever, and a few other receivers who are competing for spots right now. And guys like, you got been around a while, like Justin Ross, veterans who are coming in to compete, like a Jason Brownlee and Tyquan Thornton, who has been kind of hit and miss in OTAs, but his hits are really big hits.
Yeah, and he brings speed, which is something that everybody is going to really want on this roster with Patrick Mahomes' arm. So something to watch there. Going to be really curious to see if that can be, if they can go that direction. When we get back, we're going to talk about the defensive logjam that you have at multiple different positions right after this. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Which players do you think are going to show up in the biggest moments, and how could tracking their trends help you build your next bet? What would it look like to combine live prop bets mid-game based on how the action unfolds? How can a $200 bonus in bets add to the excitement if your first $5 bet hits? New to FanDuel? It's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA and the NFL. Offense was a lot of fun to talk about, and that's another conversation we could probably spend an entire show on, because there's so many people in so many different positions. But you start looking at the defensive positions and how this is going to play in when you start looking at all the different players that we need to talk about. I think based on what we've seen in the previous year, you're probably only keeping 5 linebackers, and I think that's probably the easiest position group to start with, because you probably already know who at least 4 of the 5 are, maybe even all 5.
Yeah, 4 of the 5, most likely for sure, between Nick Bolton, Leo Chenal, Drew Tranquil, and Jeffrey Bassa. And then it will be, who is the 5th? Cam Jones has been the guy who's the veteran, who's been around, and obviously is pretty flexible. He can play defense if needed. He's been successful in the past, at least in those week 18, game 17 options. Probably needs to have proved a little bit more in some of the performances, because he's had some, as for all of his tackling prowess, maybe all aspects of the game has been a little bit lacking. But then you've got veterans around like Cole Christensen who can compete for a spot. Once again, practice squads been a great place for him to be able to just give you a couple of games a year and a few games here and there on special teams. But there's a few guys that can challenge. Cooper McDonald, Brandon George. Brandon George is probably the guy I would say has the best chance of competing for a job amongst, once again, the undrafted linebackers that the Chiefs just seem to be able to find in spades.
Right.
So there's always undrafted linebackers that the scouting staff seems to come up with that can give you a little defense, but also just give you a lot of special teams. But Brandon George has got great size too, and strength, and a lot of physicality there that it makes him really interesting. So you're right. I mean, I could see the Chiefs. I mean, once again, could they go with 4? Yeah. I mean, 5 is most likely. Could they do the crazy thing like they did a year or 2 ago when they kept 6? Not likely, but you know what? If somebody forces themselves onto the roster, it could happen.
I don't think that that's possible with the offensive logjam they have at the line position, but I can understand why you're saying it. So I would think that there's going to be 5, and you may have a point. Maybe they only decide to go with 4. Maybe they think that they can get 2 of those veterans on the practice squad and go that direction and bring guys up to play special teams for them in that regard. Maybe that's a direction they can go. The interesting one, and we'll talk about this in a second, is going to be the corner group. I think safety, we probably have a pretty good idea. And I guess that's the other question I would have is, where do you put Shamari Connor? Because I know he still started kind of playing nickel, but with Justin Reed gone, I would think that he would be a guy that they would have in there as a safety position.
Yeah, you're probably counting him maybe a little bit of halfway. I mean, you're certainly counting him as a safety. So push comes to shove, he's a safety that occasionally plays in the slot. That's what he is. So yeah, I mean, between Hicks, Brian Cook, you get Shamari Connor in there in the conversation. I mean, I'm assuming that Mike Edwards is a pretty guaranteed, for that spot. So now you've got 4 safeties there. I mean, that's enough. And certainly if you had any injuries into the safety group, I mean, Shamari Connor's just going probably full-time safety. I mean, that's what the direction would be. I mean, you can also squeeze in a couple of guys on the practice squad. Deion Bush can be one of those guys. You might even have another one. I mean, maybe a guy like Major Williams is able to push his way in there because he's, I mean, Steve Spagnuolo and Dave Merritt have talked about the fact that, not only is Shamari Connor, probably I mean, obviously what they think is one of their 3 best safeties, but they feel like Jaden Hicks is probably their best free safety at times. He might be their best strong safety. He might be their best safety at both spots. And, who is their second best free safety? I mean, right now, obviously you're starting Brian Cook there. So you feel like that's your guy. Who's after that? They don't really have one. So that's why, I think a guy like Major Williams has a really good chance to make at least the practice squad.
Yeah, and that was a question that Ryan and I, talked about consistently going into the draft is, could they fill that position somewhere? Because free safeties is something that they didn't really have on the roster when you look at who they already had. When you look at how this roster is going to be built, you start talking about the defensive line position. Defensive ends, I think we can probably agree you're going to probably keep 4 to 5, maybe 5, obviously. But it's the defensive tackles that are going to be something I think that is going to be a little bit of a bigger question. And if you keep 10 on the offensive line, I don't know that you can keep 10 on the defensive line.
Yeah, I mean, it does get a lot more tricky. And as much as the Chiefs and Brett Veach like to keep the 10 defensive tackles, or excuse me, 10 defensive linemen, 10 defensive tackles would be a lot. It'd be really difficult to do this year. 10 defensive linemen, they have carried 9. They've carried as few as 8.
Yep.
And right now you look at this, the defensive tackle spot, I mean, that's the one where they're still just the iffiest because you've got Chris Jones. What's next? Okay, Jerry Tillery and Mike Pennell, but both of them are part-time rotational players. So what's next? Omar Norman-Lott is almost absolutely going to be a starter on this team. That's, one of your 4. After that, I mean, you've got some guys who can compete, but we don't know about Marlon Tuipulotu. We don't know about Fabian Levitt. We don't know if those guys are legitimate contenders for the 53 or not. So you get 4 or 5 defensive ends, and yeah, I mean, 8 or 9 defensive linemen could be in the equation.
Well, and one of the things that actually has always worked in Kansas City's favor is they have defensive ends that can play the defensive tackle position at times, especially when it comes to the pass rush. So when you start looking at the defensive ends, I agree on the defensive tackle position. I think that 4 is probably your max at that position. And the one thing I will say is if Fabian Levitt doesn't find a way on the roster, like actually making the 53, I can't imagine they're going to have him on the practice squad because of his age. Even if they think that he could turn into something maybe next year, just looking at his age, He is one of the older players, and this is only his second year. It's kind of nuts in that regard. But you start looking at the defensive end group. Obviously, you have Dana, you have Minihue, George Karloftis, and FAU. Then it gets a little bit questionable as to where you're going to be going from there.
Yeah, that's why, one of the biggest guys to watch really when you get to training camp. I mean, it's really difficult this time of year in OTAs to see anything. Maybe a little bit more will become clear during the mini camp when we at least as the media get 3 straight days to kind of see how they're using some people in rotations. But Janarius Robinson is really a big X factor at that spot because if he can compete for a spot, Janarius Robinson's another one of those guys that can go both inside and outside. So, like a Mike Dana can kick inside if you needed him, and Chris Jones can kick outside. You do have a lot of flexibility with some of those players. So, yeah, I mean, I feel like Robinson, if he's good enough to make this roster, could be one of those bottom of the roster guys that gives you a lot of flexibility, and maybe it allows you to maybe get away with one fewer defensive lineman, and therefore you're able to, whether it's a 10th offensive lineman or even, like I said, an extra linebacker or an extra defensive back.
Well, and it's crazy because I didn't even mention Gelati, which you're going to have to take into account
absolutely.
as well. So my bad. I apologize on that. But so there you're already at 5. I can't imagine they're going to be moving on from FAU. So it's going to be, if they're keeping another one, it would be keeping 6. That makes the math even harder, but it is possible. But the biggest position group, and the one that I think is going to be a huge key as to how this roster is going to play out, especially on defense, is the cornerback group. You have the ones that are going to be starting. Christian Fulton's going to be a starter. Obviously, Trent McDuffie is going to be a starter. Then it gets a little bit questionable as to who's going to be starting, but they're still going to be on the roster. Jalen Watson isn't going anywhere, and Noah Williams isn't going anywhere. Past that, I don't know. I mean, you can go off of what we've seen in the past. Nazeeh Johnson is getting paid $3 million this year, regardless of whether or not he's on the roster, I believe, based on his contract he signed. So you would think that would maybe help his case. But then you have Williams, Joshua Williams, and you have Christian Roland Wallace. I mean, you have a lot of people at that corner position.
Yeah, and I would probably put like a Noah Williams compared to maybe some of the other draft picks. He might be at the 90 and 95th percent kind of category. I mean, he's got to move. He's got to make the squad. And that's not to say that right now he's not, but when you get reports from Steve Spagnuolo that he's kind of swimming right now, and you remember the Chiefs have either cut or walked away from corners that they've drafted before. Remember, they waived Nazeeh Johnson as a rookie before they were able to squeeze him onto the practice squad and keep him. They simply just walked away from Kamal Hadden, last year. So they're not tied to a guy that just simply because they draft him, especially at that cornerback position. You talk about what I call the top 3, because I include Jalen Watson in that category, because I think he's pretty well solidified himself that unless he's injured or just has a terrible, terrible camp, he's making the roster. And then you've got all the guys who have kind of been question marks because they're so inconsistent. It's Nazeeh Johnson and Joshua Williams are in that category. Both of those, I mean, if they make the squad, now you're at 5. And, we talked about 4 safeties. Okay, if Noah Williams does enough to prove that he's got a spot, then you're locked up. Okay, well, what about Chris Roland Wallace that you really liked last year? There's going to be some other guys that kind of play themselves in position. We know this. The Chiefs, once again, corner's another one of those spots that the Chiefs are really good at finding guys, especially undrafted. So I'm expecting some of these young kids, whether it's like a Melvin Smith Jr., maybe, a Darius Rush or an Eric Scott finally, find it. Gets a little bit more difficult, but, they could easily end up with 6 corners and still have 1 or 2 guys on the outside looking in that you're wishing you could keep and you might lose on the waiver, because it's probably always a good question to come in here that even though it's not going to be, I think, a main priority, Chris, the fact that Mike Borgonzi is sitting there with the first waiver claim on every single player that's going to hit waivers on the cut down to 53, you're probably in the back of your mind on some of these going to be thinking to yourself, wait a minute, we got 2 guys to cut here. We know that Mike Borgonzi loves one of these guys. maybe he doesn't love this other guy, or maybe we don't know how much he loves this other guy, or maybe it's a Noel Williams that they really don't know what he thinks about this guy, or maybe they know from history, maybe they already know what he thinks about Noel Williams. They've got some insight there, and that like I said, that's not a deciding factor, but could it be an influential factor when they're thinking about some guys and who to waive? They're going to be thinking about who Bergonzi is hoping that they waive.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point, because when you look at it, Kansas City generally hasn't had a ton of players that have been claimed year after year after year. With the guy being number one, having just going from Kansas City to Tennessee, I do think that that's possible that could be changing this year. Be real interesting to see if that ends up happening. When we get back, we're going to talk about some long shots to make the roster and some guys that could be really trying to make an aim for themselves right after this. Say goodbye to sticky notes, scribbled plans on the fridge, and overlapping calendar invites. The Skylight Calendar is here to bring clarity to the chaos and help families stay organized without the stress. This sleek digital display syncs with your existing calendars, Google, Apple, Outlook, and many more, making it simple to track appointments, practices, dinners, and reminders all in one easy-to-see place. What would it mean to eliminate the I don't know excuse from your family's routine? Could assigning everyone their own color finally solve the who does what confusion in your house? How often do plans get missed because they're buried in a digital calendar or not written down at all? Would seeing your whole week clearly on a 15-inch HD screen help you stay focused and less overwhelmed? Right now, Skylight is offering our listeners $30 off their 15-inch calendars by going to skylightcal.com/NFL. Go to skylightcal.com/NFL for $30 off your 15-inch calendar. That is skylightcal.com/NFL. This is the fun part. We've talked about offense. We talked about defense. Let's talk about some long shots, because this is where people really want to know who is a guy that maybe is a long shot but does have a chance at making the roster.
Yeah, I mean, talk about long shots. Obviously, you're usually talking about undrafted free agents. Those are the guys that are certainly the most fun to watch and to root for. And there's always a favorite. I mean, obviously this year, Jake Briningstool is by far away the number one favorite, just because not only does he look the part. I mean, he's got the size, he's got the athleticism, he's already shown that he's got the skill set. I'm still not entirely sure why he didn't get drafted. Still doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I mean, the Chiefs in a different scenario, they might have taken him as high as the 5th round. There was obviously a few other teams that were interested in him as a free agent, and the Chiefs had to pay a little bit guaranteed to make sure they got him. We talk about Briningstool. He might not, I mean, hey, things can happen. He might not be the one that breaks through. But there's a lot of other guys that certainly flashed. I mean, Elijah Badger's gotten a lot of attention. He's worth watching, although I think that any of the undrafted receivers are going to have a hard time. And that applies to, guys like Magdalena, who's a little undersized. If he makes it, I think it would have to be as a special teams player as well. Jimmy Holiday is really interesting because he was a tryout player that won a spot and has been really impressive. I mean, he would be trying to take the, gosh, why am I blanking on his name, Chris? Jody Fortson. He'd be trying to take the Jody Fortson route of, trying to take the route from just tryout guy to making the roster. Got a chance. We talked about a couple of the others that, Brandon George is one of those guys at the linebacker spot that I think has a chance. We've talked about the thin numbers at defensive tackle. So Keziah Izzard from Penn State, it's got a legitimate chance. The two linemen definitely have a chance. Essa Poole and Dalton Cooper. Like I said, Cooper, they've moved inside, so if he makes it, it's going to be as like a guard. Poole has, I think his name is actually, I think it's actually pronounced Poole. It's spelled Pole, but if he makes the team, I mean, it would be as a tackle. But there's a lot of talent there, and he could certainly challenge, Ethan Driscoll for that spot on the roster that Driscoll had last year. So there's a bunch of guys, and probably the other one that's definitely worth talking about is Eddie Chaplitsky, the punter, the Ray Guy winner, because this kid can kick. And I thought it before Dave Tobe even said it out loud. This kid's going to kick in the NFL. Can he beat out Matt Araiza, or is he just here to push Matt Araiza to be better than he was a year ago? One of those two things is true. It might both be true. I mean, he might be pushing Matt Araiza, but he also might push him out.
Yeah, it's interesting because you brought up earlier how corner and linebacker are those positions that they seem to find guys. I'm not so sure I wouldn't say punter is one of them too. Look at some of the guys that they've brought in. I mean, Tommy Townsend was a great punter. Jack Fox, look at what he's done since he went and since he kicked in Kansas City. I mean, there's lots of different guys, so it wouldn't shock me. It surprised me a little bit just based on the fact that Ariza is a guy that looked like he had a huge leg, and it is the holder, and obviously there's some other things that'll play into that. But he wasn't great at directionally kicking, and I do know that that's going to be something that they're going to really care about. So it's going to be interesting to watch that one. The name that you didn't say that I'm kind of interested in, although we did talk about him earlier, Tyquan Thornton, I think, is still a long shot. I know he's not an undrafted free agent, and I understand it's a little bit different, but I still think he's a long shot. But it wouldn't shock me because of the speed. If he continues to do what he's doing and he can show in camp what he has done and catch some deep balls, I think that could really open things up for him. But another one that you didn't mention and we didn't talk about in the first segment, CJ Hansen was a 7th round pick last year. He's still sitting there. And granted, it's possible that he maybe doesn't make the roster, but at the same time, it's one of those things where you have to wonder. I don't think that the fact that they drafted him in the 7th round is going to matter. It's just going to be, can he beat somebody else out?
Yeah, when you're talking about like the 4 rookie linemen, since Kingsley's kind of in a different category, but you then get into bringing the conversation Hunter Nordzaad, CJ Hansen, and Ethan Driscoll. I mean, Hansen's the least polished and developed of that group. So that's why I think he's definitely got the most difficult road to challenge with. Not that he can't do it. I mean, the skill set is there. He just needs coming from Holy Cross, he just needs a little bit more polish, a little bit more work to be able to compete. I think that year at Penn State, for instance, really helped Hunter Nordzaad, helped get him ready for the NFL. And Ethan Driscoll's just huge. And I mean, at a tackle position, that's a little bit different than Hansen and Nordzaad, so a little bit different competition for him too. And you're right, he can move. There's once again an athletic skill set there that if he can add some strength and punch to it, he can play. I think there's two. You've talked about Thornton. I'll bring in Brownlee that we talked about during the receiver conversation. I mean, those guys are both in that group with, like I said, Justin Ross, maybe, and Sky Moore, all being maybe on the outside looking in at that receiver spot right now, but all of them could absolutely potentially make it, and maybe candidates for the practice squad if they don't make it. But Thornton is probably the most interesting of that group to me because he's got flashes. He had a really good rookie year for the Patriots when things weren't going necessarily great for the Patriots. He was a bright spot and then just kind of fell off the face of the earth. Well, their quarterback position kind of fell off the face of the earth. And he had an injury that kind of slowed him down.
A lot different here.
Yeah, I mean, and if Thornton can, really click on this offense, his speed can be a difference maker. And if Jason Brownlee can be consistent and hold on to the football, make some catches, he can compete for a spot there too. I mean, it's a deep group across the board. I mean, there are guys that are either veterans or rookies that are, competing for spots on this team. And maybe some of them, Chris, I mean, we're just assuming in spots. I mean, we're assuming like an Elijah Mitchell is maybe on this team.
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily mean it's so, because guys like Elijah Young, I mean, we can also set aside for a moment that's the new name. After the Chiefs were going out of their way, it seemed like to sign every Isaiah on the planet that had at least, and they were all spelled differently.
The new one.
Elijah's the new one. So we got a lot of Elijahs. We got at least 3 that I can think of off the top of my head.
Well,
there might be.
And I know this won't be a popular opinion. I would think that it's probably almost a guarantee, but I would almost say that Kareem Hunt isn't necessarily a lock either, mainly because of his age and if he falls off from last year. That's the big question. You haven't seen it yet, and we won't really know until we get to camp. But that would be the only thing that we could be keeping him off the roster.
Yeah, what we really don't know is just how much did not having an off season affect him last year.
Yep.
We know from what we saw last year that we're pretty sure Kareem Hunt, and just from the last few seasons, I mean, Kareem Hunt is not the workhorse back that he once was. I mean, his workload probably needs to be in the maybe 150 touches, give or take. Get him to 200 touches or more, and his efficiency is going to go down. But is he also your best short yardage back? Probably.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a spot for him if he is as effective in short yardage as he was a year ago. Yeah,
that's the key. It's are his legs still there? Because another year older and all the wear and tear he got last year is the big question on that, because he really fell off at the end last year to an extent. So something to watch when we talk about this roster and how it's going to be made up. There's going to be a ton of talk over the next couple of weeks and months over this roster. We're going to have it here covered for you on Locked On Chiefs. I know Matt's going to have it covered for you on Chiefs Digest. Matt, thank you so much for coming on today. We really do appreciate it. We will be back tomorrow to talk more, and I will have more information for you on OTAs, which we actually get information on from the Wednesday practice. Thank you for listening today, and we will talk to you tomorrow.